I don't know if this is true or not, that some scientists are trying to figure out a way to block the sun to try to slow down global warming.
Yeah, it's a measure of the feeling of desperation that some of them feel.
Are they really thinking they could do that?
Well, some of them are seriously proposing, and I think it's completely nuts.
Yeah.
You put another kind of pollution, sulfur dioxide, up to orbit, cover the atmosphere. The sky won't be really blue in the way it is now anymore.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding. From the words I spit, so sharp, so freezing. So cold, behold, frostbite they feeling. I could tear you apart or I could go heal them. Don't believe in faith.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up.
Kneeling, got lust for change, I just love the feeling. I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. And I ain't gonna give up. Got too little time, I'ma live up. Head down, push forward through the tough times. Cause anything worth doing is a tough climb. Cause I'ma live life for the fight, yeah, I'm here to get it. I got drive, got sight, always have a vision. I go by at night, I be in my feelings. I'ma be fine, need time, and I'll soon be winning.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jet and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in
No,
emissions.
we'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
Seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper.
this geoengineering idea in its simplest form is basically the following. You could put fine particles, say sulfuric acid particles, sulfates, into the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, where they'd reflect away sunlight and cool the planet. There's lots of mystery in the details, and there's some bad side effects, like it partially destroys the ozone layer, and I'll get to that in a minute, but it clearly cools down. And one other thing, it's fast. I guess the thing I haven't said about this is it is absurdly cheap. It's amazing how we can affect the planet. The one thing about this is it gives us extraordinary leverage. This improved science and engineering will, whether we like it or not, give us more and more leverage to affect the planet, to control the planet, to give us weather and climate control, not because we plan it, not because we want it, just because science delivers it to us bit by bit.
What is geoengineering?
It's really two very different things. One is ways that we would alter the amount of sunlight the Earth absorbs, and so cool the planet, partly offsetting the effects of carbon in the atmosphere, and that's called solar radiation management, or in some technocratic way, SRM. And the other one is to take carbon out of the atmosphere, so-called carbon dioxide removal.
Before we get into the pros and cons of it, how solar radiation management might work.
Conceptually, it's simple. The doing it is not the hard part, but you could use aircraft or other methods to deliver literally tons or millions of tons of very small reflective aerosols, tiny particles, say, to the upper atmosphere.
Spraying them out at a high altitude.
Correct.
Isn't one of the problems with the climate and studying the climate is that it's incredibly difficult to know exactly how it works. It is very difficult to model.
Sure, it's impossible to know exactly, but you can still learn a lot.
Tell you a little bit about some new work we've been doing, thinking about how you actually might put aerosols in the stratosphere. The novel method we've been thinking about, or it's not novel at all, it's actually exactly what happens from aircraft contrails, is that we put a condensable, a few megatons a year of sulfur would be enough to produce sort of 4 watts per square meter radiative forcing directly out of the back of an aircraft. There's a huge literature in the nanofabrication world about making fine particles from low vapor pressure gas. And there's nothing very hard in terms of aircraft engineering. If you go to aircraft engineers and we've done this, they say, that would be easy, we could do this if you want us to. We've mostly thought about sulfur, and there's a lot of good reasons to think about sulfur, because sulfur's what nature does, at least in this version of the model. It says if you put sulfur in continuously, you actually get a remarkably ineffective result. Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric rate as sulfur, but roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate. So you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass flow. The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make high-quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it certainly seems pretty cost-effective and easy to do this with aircraft that are not very different from conventional aircraft. High-class business jets like the Gulfstream have wing designs that are very efficient. So with slightly different engine choices, they can easily deliver large weights up to sort of 20 kilometers or a little higher.
Solar geoengineering refers to a set of technologies that could allow humanity to deliberately increase the planet's reflectivity, and so partially offsetting the temperature changes and other climate changes that come from the accumulation of carbon dioxide. Solar geoengineering can be very inexpensive. The cost might be something like $10 billion for the whole planet. That sounds like a lot of money each year, but in fact that's something like 1/10,000th of global GDP.
One idea would be that you put little particles up into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere, that reflect light. And by reflecting sunlight back out to space, you effectively cool the Earth and counteract the warming. Or you can do things by changing the chemistry of the ocean that would put more CO2, take more CO2 out of the atmosphere, and a variety of other ideas. So interesting. So there's a couple of issues that one needs to bear in mind. That leads me to think that it's a little too early to resort to geoengineering. First of all, it's easy to think about it, but imagine if you wanted to continually put particles up into the stratosphere using airplanes. It turns out that logistically that's a difficult thing to do. Secondly, you're altering the natural system. You're altering, in this case, the atmosphere, to do this, to lower the temperature. But while you're lowering the temperature by reflecting light from the stratosphere, you're decreasing the amount of energy that's absorbed in the stratosphere, that's absorbed in the atmosphere, that's absorbed in the surface of the Earth. As a result of that, you're going to change the atmospheric circulation. As a result of that, you're probably going to change the precipitation patterns. And as a result of that, who knows what. And so what you're doing is you're maybe solving one problem and creating another that is maybe even worse than the first one. So do you really want to take that chance? And the last thing is that simply countering the warming effect of CO2 actually doesn't solve all our problems. For example, in addition to being a warming gas, a heat-trapping gas, carbon dioxide is a weak acid when it dissolves in water or dissolves in seawater. And what's happening is by continually putting CO2 into the atmosphere, we're increasing the acidity of the ocean. And as we increase the acidity of the ocean, we're making it harder and harder for what we call calcareous critters in the ocean, like coral reefs, like shrimp, like clams and things like that, from forming their shells and their skeletons. And ultimately, that has an impact on the entire food chain of the ocean. And more than 1 billion people depend upon that food chain.
Rising ocean temperatures and a surge in tropical storms have put tremendous stress on sections of the Great Barrier Reef in recent years. And mass coral bleaching events are lasting longer and happening more frequently.
Back-to-back coral bleaching events in 2016 and 2017, and most recently in 2020, have left their mark on parts of the reef where coral was too hot for too long and withered away.
The record number of fires burning across Brazil's Amazon rainforest has prompted renewed global outcry over climate change. And big spending. $5 million from Leonardo DiCaprio, £10 million from the UK. Meanwhile, Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
Shrinking reservoirs, depleted aquifers, drying rivers. These images reveal the scale of the mega drought sweeping the American West. It's the worst drought the region has seen in at least 1,200 years.
Since rainfall has become very intense in the Arabian Peninsula, many part of desert has turned into green land. Some areas already have permanent sources of water. Stream and river start to flow and the valley has turned into lake. It is hard to imagine, but if you read ancient literature, the Prophet Muhammad has ever prophecies about this phenomena 1,000 years ago. The prophet stated that the final hour would not come until the land of Arabia reverts to meadows and rivers.
The
Euphrates is the longest and one of the most historically important rivers of Western Asia, on which the various lives of the ancients depended heavily on this river. Now, the drying up of the Euphrates River is not just a prophecy, but it is actually happening today. Along with the drying up of the Euphrates River, many ancient discoveries have emerged, and even these discoveries have shocked the world.
I can hear the demons call when they do what they do. And now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta get through. Cause I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. Sometimes I feel like all is lost, but I know it's not true. I wanna put up all my walls cause I'm not in the mood, but then I cut myself off from the rest of the room. I know that time can heal it all if you're patient, and soon it can all be worth it, all the searching. Pain is never really permanent, but damn it hurts, man. I could feel all of the turbulence and it's concerning. I've been searching for a purpose, I hope it's worth it. This society is really trying me. Ain't no hide and seek, I hide to be far from anxiety. I need my space, I need my privacy. I need some silence, please, you're all too loud. You don't speak quietly, opinions violently thrown across every surface. It makes me nervous, is the world honestly burning? That's all I'm learning. Hope that we can make a turn and start reversing all our minds and put the work in. We got some work, man. I started to do. I can hear the demons call when they do what they do, and now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta get through. Cause I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through. I can hear the demons call when they do what they do, and now I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know that time can heal it all, I just gotta get through. I just gotta get through, I just gotta get through. Cause I feel like taking off, find a place with a view. The pain is never gonna stop if it's controlling you. I know